The largest land empire in the history of the world was built by a tiny nation of nomads you'd never expect. One country was conquered so many times it became the most fought-over prize on Earth, and the people who went on to build the biggest empire ever were themselves once just a distant, muddy frontier of somebody else's. Here's the truth. The map of the world today isn't really about countries. It's about who conquered whom. Here's the biggest empire that ever ruled every country. Let's begin where it all radiated from: Italy. This is the heart of the Roman Empire, one of the most powerful forces in human history. From the city of Rome, emperors ruled a domain that stretched across 3 continents, from the rainy edges of Britain to the deserts of Egypt. For centuries, Rome dictated the laws, roads, language, and borders of the Western world. Nearly everything that came after, in Europe and beyond, was built on foundations the Romans laid. When we talk about empires, this is the one all others are measured against. Now travel to the far northwestern corner of that empire, the United Kingdom. Here's a fact that surprises almost everyone. Long before Britain ruled the waves, Britain was the conquered. The Romans invaded, built walls, roads, and cities, and treated the island as a distant, chilly outpost of their vast empire. The people who would one day build the largest empire the world has ever seen began as a frontier province of somebody else's. It's one of history's great reversals, the conquered growing up to become the greatest conqueror of all. Head to Egypt, perhaps the most conquered land in all of history. Egypt was once a mighty empire itself, but its riches made it a prize that everyone wanted. The Persians took it. Then Alexander the Great. Then Rome, where Cleopatra herself ruled as Egypt became the empire's breadbasket, feeding the city of Rome with its grain. Later came the Arabs, the Ottomans, and finally the British. Egypt's story is a parade of the greatest empires on earth, each one marching in to claim the treasure of the Nile. Now to Greece, a country that didn't just get ruled by empires, it created one of the greatest of all time. Under Alexander the Great, this small land produced an empire that exploded outward, conquering Persia and pushing all the way to the borders of India in just a few short years. Alexander spread Greek language and ideas across the entire ancient world before dying young, and his empire shattered soon after, but its cultural echo lasted for 1,000 years. Few nations so small have ever cast a shadow so enormous. Travel east to Iran, the homeland of the Persian Empire. Long before Rome, this was arguably the first true world empire. Under kings like Cyrus and Darius, Persia ruled a staggering slice of humanity, connecting Egypt to India with roads, mail systems, and a tolerance for local customs that was remarkable for its time. It was the superpower of the ancient world. Modern Iran sits on the legacy of an empire that, at its height, may have ruled a larger share of the world's people than any before it. Now to Turkey, the seat of an empire that lasted over 600 years, the Ottoman Empire. From their capital at Constantinople, a city they seized in a legendary siege, the Ottoman sultans ruled across the Middle East, North Africa, and deep into Europe. For centuries, they were one of the most powerful forces on the planet, controlling the crossroads between continents. The Ottoman Empire only fell about a century ago, and modern Turkey rose directly from its ashes, the direct heir to one of history's great superpowers. Fly across the Atlantic to Mexico, where 2 empires collided. Before the Europeans came, this was the land of the mighty Aztec Empire, with a capital city larger than most in Europe at the time. Then, in the 1500s, the Spanish Empire arrived. A small band of conquistadors, aided by disease and local rivalries, toppled the Aztecs and claimed the land for Spain. For 300 years, Mexico was the jewel of a Spanish empire so vast, it was said the sun never set on it. 2 great empires, one conquering the other. Just south, in Peru, the story rhymes. This was the center of the Inca Empire, the largest empire in the entire history of the Americas, a breathtaking civilization of mountain cities and roads carved across the Andes without the wheel or iron tools. And then, once again, the Spanish came. A tiny group of conquistadors brought this vast empire crashing down and folded it into Spain's growing dominion. The ruins of the Inca, like Machu Picchu, still stand as monuments to an empire swallowed whole. Now to Brazil, the odd one out in South America. While Spain grabbed nearly the entire continent, Brazil fell to a different power, the Portuguese Empire. A centuries-old treaty had split the New World in 2, handing this enormous territory to Portugal. That's the reason Brazil speaks Portuguese today while its neighbors speak Spanish, a living fingerprint of an empire that once stretched from South America to Africa to Asia, all from one small country on the edge of Europe. Head to Nigeria, home to an empire most people have never heard of. Long before the Europeans arrived, West Africa held the mighty Mali Empire. Its ruler, Mansa Musa, is often called the richest person who ever lived. When he traveled to Mecca, he gave away so much gold along the way that he accidentally crashed the economies of entire cities. Later, the British Empire would draw the borders of modern Nigeria. But this land once held a kingdom so wealthy, its legend still echoes across the centuries. Now to India, the crown jewel of the largest empire in all of history, the British Empire. India had been ruled by great powers before, like the mighty Mughals, but it was Britain that made it the centerpiece of a global empire that covered a quarter of the entire planet. From here, the British drew wealth, soldiers, and prestige. It was said the sun never set on the British Empire, and India was the brightest jewel in its crown, a relationship that reshaped both nations forever. That same empire reaches our next stop, the United States. The story of America begins as 13 small colonies clinging to the eastern coast, ruled from across the ocean by the British Crown. Spain and France held enormous stretches of the continent too, but it was against the British Empire that the colonies famously revolted and won. The most powerful nation on Earth today was born as a breakaway piece of the most powerful empire of its day. Empires, it turns out, have a habit of giving birth to their own rivals. Now we turn east for the grand finale, beginning in China. This ancient land was home to powerful dynasties for thousands of years. But in the 1200s, it was conquered and absorbed into something even larger, the Mongol Empire. A grandson of Genghis Khan seized all of China and ruled it as emperor. For the first time in its long history, the whole of China answered to a foreign horseman from the northern steppe. Even this ancient giant was swallowed by the empire we're building toward. That same empire also ruled our next stop, Russia. For nearly 250 years, the Russian lands lay under the domination of the Mongols, a period Russians remember as a harsh and defining chapter. But here's the twist. Once Russia finally broke free, it began expanding relentlessly in every direction, growing into the Russian Empire. Itself, one of the largest empires the world has ever seen. Russia went from conquered vassal to one of history's greatest conquerors, spanning 11 time zones. And finally, the source of it all, Mongolia. This is where the largest connected land empire in the history of the world was born. In the 1200s, a leader named Genghis Khan united the scattered nomadic tribes and launched a conquest so vast it's almost hard to believe. From this remote, sparsely populated land, the Mongols carved out an empire stretching from China all the way to the edge of Europe, ruling much of the world you've just seen in this very video. A tiny nation of horsemen, briefly, ruled the world. So, did you see the real pattern? Two names tower above all the rest: Rome in the west and the Mongols in the east. Empires so vast, they still shaped the borders, languages, and nations we live in today. From a handful of conquerors on horseback to sultans and kings, the map of our world was drawn by the rise and fall of empires. Every border tells the story of who once held the power. If you found this fascinating, hit subscribe, because we break down the world exactly like this every single week. And tell me in the comments which empire once ruled the land where you live. I read every single one. And to see the most common religion in every country, click the video on your screen right now.